If not, on this vote, the yeas are 50 and the nays are 50. The Senate being equally divided, the Vice President votes in the affirmative, and the nomination is confirmed.
Media Outlaw.
All right. It has been week 1 of the new era in Washington, D.C., and it has been predictably a very busy and frenetic one. Donald Trump, the 47th president, man is not acting like he's 79 years old. Is hitting the ground running, sprinting actually, and already things are happening. I mean, for somebody who's going to be covering not only obviously his second term within the political sphere, but covering other news and trying to find unique perspectives in which to present to you, this is going to be hard, because you got to be able to keep up. And with this man, you never know just what's going to happen day to day. I mean, you're doing your day to day normal job, and you want to leave it because all you can do is stay on your phone looking for this reaction, that reaction. And we're going to get into a whole lot of that today. So what I'm going to be doing is going through as quickly as possible a full show over dealing with essentially 4 subjects, which I will have broken down into individual videos in case you want to jump around, okay? A lot happened this week, so we're going to cover what I think are some of the most essential items. Obviously, written down some things to kind of keep me on track, keep me from wandering back and forth, and let's get into this. So, again, as you can see down right here, I am Kiara Ashanti. This is the Media Outlaw. That was J.D. Vance breaking the tie for the Senate confirmation hearing for Pete Hegseth, who's going to be now confirmed head of the DOD. So let's take a look at a couple things. Let me throw on these glasses real quick so I can make sure I've got everything going here. So as we've discussed before, let me just move this out of my face so you can see that. Pete Hegseth, high risk, high reward. I wrote an article a couple of weeks ago, about 3 weeks ago, when the nomination first hit the news, and kind of evaluated Pete specifically apart from some of the other nominations that President Trump has made. High risk, high reward is the title. I suggest you go to Substack, Media Outlaw, to look for it. I'll have a link down below as well so you can read that piece. I get into really good depth, fairly, about what are the risks for having both the nomination at that time and having Pete in the actual position going forward, and what the potential rewards are. One of the things we discussed, of course, just a couple of days ago was his hearing, which was contentious because of the personal life of Pete and many of the things that he's done in the past with regard to his marriages, his ex-wives, potential drinking problems, and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, after watching that hearing, watching Kristen Gillibrand, watching Tim Kaine, watching all of these other people essentially go off the rails, it was clear he was going to get confirmed. I said it, pretty much every other commentator that has been speaking on politics and is fair-minded said the same thing. He was going to get confirmed. The only issue was really how many votes was he going to get. Now, what I'm going to do is take a little time to look up something real quick, because The thing that just move Pete out the way here real quick. One of the things that was interesting is we thought that Pete might get 52 or 53 votes, and it ended up being tied, as you just saw in the video, with JD Vance breaking the tie. So who did we lose? Because at first I thought certainly we were going to gain the Democrats and then we lost them, right? But that's not what happened. So who voted against Pete Hegseth? Because I think we lost the turtle down there in Kentucky, Senator McConnell. And of course, maybe Collins and Murkowski from Maine and Alaska, respectively. So let's see how each senator voted on Pete Hegseth. So what I'm going to do is, this is always a little bit tricky. Let me see if I can bring this in to the system here. No, it's not going to let me do that. I know there's a way for me to do it, but because I want you to see what this is here. All right, let's go here. All right. Yeah, okay. So let's see this. This is not going to be perfect on the screen here. Let me just adjust that. There you go. All right, so let's see who didn't vote. For the detail, let's just go to Mitch McConnell right quick because I think he's one of the ones that we lost. McConnell. Yep, right there. Lost him. And I can tell you, Republicans are not happy about that. We're not happy about that. Murkowski, also a no, so we lost her. And then Collins, clearly we lost them. So what does that mean? What does that mean from a practical level here with regard to Trump's strength? Because this was one of three nominations that were going to be the most contentious, most people have been predicting. Pete, RFK, obviously, Tulsi Gabbard, obviously, and Cam for FBI director. Those are the four that, it's pretty established that we think there's going to be the biggest pushback from the Democrats on. And pretty much everybody else is going to get confirmed. Yeah, the Democrats are going to play some games with trying to delay, trying to obfuscate. And so, Republicans are already using parliamentary procedures to bypass and force them to not play the silly time slow walk game. But these other four, they may be holding their ammo for. So having said that, what does it mean that Trump lost McConnell, Collins, Murkowski? Well, from a practical matter, doesn't really mean a damn thing because they got 50-50. JD's the tie-breaking vote on any of these situations, and so Pete got confirmed. But moving forward, it is what I would call a mini win for the Democrats. You got to understand something. Right now, the Democrats are in complete disarray. They're in complete disarray because, A, they don't have a central leader. That's not Kamala, and just because she got the nomination, that was never really going to be Kamala. Nancy Pelosi is still somewhat shell-shocked about what happened, and she's also very old. So her power, most demonstrably shown in what she did in forcing Biden out of the election campaign. It may have reached its peak and is now going to be on the downslide. There doesn't seem to be any other national figure ready to step into the breach to be a, quote, future presidential candidate at this point. It's kind of early for that sort of thing anyway, but when you're trying to, organize so that you can resist whatever your opposition is doing, these things matter. And the Democrats don't have it right now. They also don't have a coherent, effective plan for how they're going to deal with Donald Trump. When you don't have a plan, when you don't have any new practices, then you fall back to what you typically do, right? It's kind of like in sports. One of the things that coaches are always telling people is you play how you practice. And so if you've got new plays, if you've got new habits that you're trying to instill in your players, either on the basketball court or on the football field, if those habits aren't ingrained, if you don't even have a plan and start working on what those new habits are supposed to be, your players are just going to default back to what it is that they've been doing. And so for Democrats, what that looks like is gnashing of teeth and shrieking of their voices. So they went all in on the personal stuff with Pete in the hearing. That didn't work, wasn't going to work because it just didn't make them sound reasonable, which is unfortunate, as we'll get to in a second. Some of the things that we're going to talk about as well with regard to Trump's first week doing certain press conferences, the things that he said, his executive orders, those are things that are also people are going to be freaking out about. And, the news media, they're already ramping up the lies and rhetoric about what is actually happened or happening and likely to happen with his, time in office. In fact, Stephen A. Smith, it's kind of interesting. Obviously, he's a sports guy. Doesn't really know politics as well as he does sports. But, he has a podcast now, so he's going to touch on the subjects of the day. And because he is a really good communicator in terms of his ability to speak on pretty much anything, whether he knows the information or not, he's going to be saying some things. Most of it is not too on point because he doesn't know what he's talking about or because he's trying to toe a line between saying what he thinks is true versus not pissing off his core audience, which are black and woke. But one of the things that he said on News Nation when he did a panel with Chris Cuomo and Bill O'Reilly is talking about Democrats not falling for the okie doke, which is, falling into the trap of getting super upset and going off the rails on every single thing that Trump says or does, instead of just taking a chill pill and looking at what's likely to be stopped by somebody else, and so they don't really have much that they need to fight, and focusing on the things that are going to matter most. Because one of the problems that the Democrats ran into is both a real life and perception problem. In real life, their policies under Biden sucked. They didn't work. Now, people who have been in politics for a while know that was always likely to be the case. Democrat policies just don't work. But putting that aside, it was a disaster under Biden. So you don't have a product to sell. And then you're perceived to be going after things that are not important. Oh, we're going to make sure that the girls have to play sports against the boys. We're going to allow boys into the girls' bathrooms, even if the girls are at risk of getting assaulted, like happened to a teenage girl up in Maryland a couple years ago. That perception is a problem. So what you don't want is to have the same perception that you're putting off to the public that just got your asses kicked in the election. But they don't have a plan. So this is what they're doing, falling back to the default of Trump hatred, Trump derangement syndrome, and sounding like they're unhinged. And it's not going to be very helpful to them whatsoever. Let's talk about an alternative world here. Let's bring Pete back up here on the screen real quick. Okay. So, getting back to the people who didn't vote for him in the confirmation. Here are the primary issues with Pete. And I've touched on them again in the article that I mentioned. See that article for much more in-depth details. But in general, Pete has, he's a player. It's just, I mean, this isn't the best picture of Pete, but still, from a female's perspective, he's probably the best looking Department of Defense head that the country's ever had, all right? Which is a problem. The ladies love Pete, and Pete loves the ladies. And that has gotten him in trouble with all of his marriages. And it got him in trouble, ultimately, with somebody that accused him of assault, even though the sexual encounter that they had was, in fact, consensual. But apart from the personal, Pete does not have any experience running an organization that has a budget of nearly $1 trillion. He's a talk show host. Yes, he had his own nonprofit organization that he ran, but he had maybe, 30, 40 employees? Not nothing, but, look, you're going to have 30 or 40 staffers as the head of defense alone, let alone that you're in charge of the whole military-industrial complex. So that's a problem. You can objectively look at Pete and his background, the scope of the job, and say he's not qualified. Democrats easily had a simple attack mode that they could have gone into that would have sounded like something like this. You got Donald Trump and all you Republicans running around talking about DEI and how Democrats are not into hiring people who are qualified for certain positions. And as insulting as that is to the millions of minorities around the country that have worked hard and gotten trained and been to college, you're trying to put up a guy who hasn't even run a large organization past 50 people to run the whole Department of Defense. He's not been a general. He hasn't been in charge of large portions of the military. He just served. And we respect his service, but that doesn't mean he's got the credentials and background to run the Department of Defense. See how easy that was? That's all they had to do. And then focus your questions on that. That sounds reasonable to people outside the Beltway. Because it's a legitimate, valid point. It's kind of besides the point in terms of what Donald Trump is trying to accomplish with this pick. But from a point of view of just opposition, if I'm steel manning this case for the Democrats, that's what you open, continue with, and close on. He doesn't have the experience. Now, if you want to get into the personal, you don't go into all of the ex-wives. You forget about that. You talk about the decision-making that goes into that. Because that type of decision-making makes him a target for honey traps. If you're not familiar with what a honey trap is, that's literally a real thing in which foreign adversaries, or sometimes even corporations, use attractive women, young women that are working for them to cozy up next to people of power and get them to reveal secrets get them to reveal information as pillow talk. It's a pretty effective thing. You see it in movies all the time because, let's face it, dudes are stupid. You put a pretty girl in front of us and half of us don't know how to think. Clearly, that's Pete, because that's what he's shown. And if you follow up on that, again, that sounds more legitimate and unhinged. But they didn't do that. So now they're going to have to deal with them. Now, high risk, high reward. Republicans and Trump have gotten what they want. They've got their guy. Time will tell whether or not that was a smart decision. Look, one of the things that I talk about, and let me bring this up as well. I believe it's in chapter 5 that I talk about this in American Backbone, out on Amazon right now, where I talk about the leadership qualities, both good and bad, that Trump exhibited in his first term. Whenever anybody's in charge, there are lessons that you can learn from them, good and bad. Things to do, things to not do. And one of the things that I talk about with Trump specifically, but it applies to, in this situation, to Pete as well, because Trump wants Pete to do in the military what he's attempting to do more broadly politically. And that's this: being a disruptor, an outsider. So in leadership with organizations, there are two types of leaders that one can have. Okay. Oh, did this? Let me lose again. Two types of leadership. The first is kind of the managerial type of leadership. Somebody that's coming in and they're going to oversee things, almost like a wise grandfather. But you're just making sure everything runs smoothly. You're really not trying to innovate. You're not trying to go off into blue sea areas. You're just maintaining, strengthening, and keeping the organization the way it is moving forward. That's kind of like stewardship. Then there's the disruptor type of leader. This is a leader that's going to come in and shake things up. A leader that looks at the organization, whichever organization it happens to be, U.S. government, IBM, your marketing team, doesn't matter what it is. They look at what the organization's doing, where its failings are, and decide that everything needs to be shaken up. Major changes need to be made. And these types of change agents disrupt not only, hopefully, the field that the company is competing in, but they disrupt the way the company organization works. And that can cause problems, because when you have an outsider coming in, especially, who's going to be the change agent, there is going to be resistance to that change. There is no organization in this country more resistant to change than the U.S. government and all its departments. Okay? These are institutions that have a way of operating over decades with permanent administrators there that work there and will be there, this president and the next president. And most of them are not interested in turning the government into something that's as efficient and effective as something you might find in the private sector. So when you're that type of person, you're going to get resistance. You're not going to know how the internal, non-formal ways of getting things done are completed. And that's always a problem. That was a big problem for Trump, because he's coming from business. In business, you decide that something's going to change, and you just tell people to change it. And it gets changed, period. Because you're the boss. Well, it doesn't quite work that way with government. Yes, the president is the commander-in-chief. He is the executive of the country. And within the executive branch, there are a lot of things that he can do that must be done now. But all of the things that take a much longer time to complete and that are going to affect or potentially affect the country in one direction or another for a long time, these are things that have to be worked through Congress and Senate. You don't get to just decide. And that was one of the things that Trump misunderstood coming into his first term. He understands that now, but he's trying to do the same thing with the DOD, with Pete. Trump knows that Pete doesn't have that experience. Trump doesn't want him to have that experience. He wants a disruptor. He wants somebody that's going to come in there and get rid of the woke, do exactly what the commander-in-chief says like they're supposed to, get the military back to combat effectiveness, and not worried about social issues any longer because it's the military. The military is a separate entity, a separate animal than, the Department of Energy or Commerce or any of these other large government institutions where you can kind of, if you want, apply all of the social mores that you want to see in the country into those areas because they're doing important work. But the work they're doing isn't life or death. And with the military, it is. And so you can't decide for the sake of equity that you're going to lower standards for certain things so that you can have women in combat. You can't decide for the good of inclusion that you're going to decide that, hey, you can have tats, you can have this type of hairstyle, you can be trans, you can be gay. None of those things help combat effectiveness. But Pete doesn't know how the higher echelons of the department work. He doesn't know how they work in conjunction with the private military contractors, for whom, for all of the hate they get, let's not mistake, all of the cool toys that our military forces get to play with and get to use to keep us safe, those were all created by military contractors. All right, there's no department in the Army or the Air Force with scientists making these things. They go out to companies and give them contracts to come up with this stuff. So, you can't just ignore them. You've got to be able to work with them. And they have their agenda. And obviously that agenda is going to be crossways with Trump's at some time. But Pete doesn't know those relationships. And that creates a problem. We're going to see what happens. Hopefully he's successful. And I say hopefully because out of many of these picks, not the only one, but out of a lot of his picks, this is one you can't get wrong. A screw up here could be a big problem. And especially if it happens in the way that we think he could happen. So let's look at the next subject here that we need to go over, which is this week we had a lot of executive orders that went through this week. All right. I mean, we got executive orders all over the place here. So let's take a look at some of them. I've got a screenshot. Let me see if I can get the right one. There we go. All right. So this week, even before the next day, the night of the inauguration, Trump was doing executive orders at the celebration. He did 26 that night. This is how many he did the first day. And I think that's actually closer to 37 now. This is not updated because he did like 20 something, like I said, inauguration night. And then the very next day he did a bunch. But Joe Biden only get 9 his first day. Trump only get 1 his first day, the first time around. Barack Obama, his first week, did 5. Biden, 22. But Trump is up to 31, really about 37 so far, just this first week. You go down and look at some of these other these others. You can see that over the years, the number of executive orders that presidents have issued have gotten higher and higher. None beating Truman, who did 57, but he was in war, so that makes sense. Okay. A lot of executive orders, a lot of action. And so what do they really mean? Well, let's kind of break this down. All right, we're going to go over a couple that are the most important ones, but you got to understand what's really happening here. If you're a Democrat, calm down. Whew. Woosah. Okay? Just chill out. There'll be some things here that upset you. I get that. But most of the things here that you're upset about, you just don't be. They're for show. So a lot of these executive orders are really just executive orders undoing things that Biden himself came into office and wrote executive orders to undo something that Trump had did. So these were expected. They just put things back to a certain status quo. But this is not that big of a deal. This is kind of the problem with executive orders. Executive orders are not policy. They're not law. So they can only do but so much, and as soon as a new person comes in, they can be, and often are, completely nullified by the new president. And so that's what a lot of what Trump did. Now, on the things that are most important, the most important things are obviously the executive orders regarding illegal immigrants. And so they are in the following ways. I figure I just list them real quick rather than trying to go through the whole list. Number one, the app that the Biden administration created that allowed migrants to ostensibly sign up to be a migrant and to get a queue in line for a court date for not amnesty, but allow them to get asylum that these people never showed up for. That has been canceled. So all the people that were jumping on that number as of the date that Trump took office, I think was 1.4 million people. They're not going to be able to use that app to get in there. And now I've seen many people, including Stephen A. Smith, get really upset with people saying that if you're smiling and cackling and happy about that, that basically we don't have any heart. And to that I would say, Stephen, shut up. Just stop. If you don't know what you're talking about, don't talk. Okay? It's just better to zip it. All right? This is an app that was always a scam. Basically, you could be on your way toward the border in a group led by coyotes, which are people hired by the cartel to sneak you across the border. And as soon as you're within range of the U.S., you get on a phone, get on this app to try and become an actual asylum seeker. And then they let you into the country. You have your little court date. And then, poof, you never show up to the court. You just disappear into the country. They can't find you. And certainly local law enforcement, if you're in places like LA, New York, Chicago, they're not interested in trying to find you. So that was always a scam. It's completely and utterly stupid. All right. So that's gone. He's wrote an executive order for the rounding up of criminal illegals. Now, I want you guys to focus in on this because some of the gnashing of the teeth, so to speak, that we've begun to see this week from people in the media, people on social media, American citizens upset and what have you. These are the sob stories that we're beginning to see, or we knew was going to be the case when people started getting rounded up. Understand there are a lot, millions of illegals in this country. Trump's first focus, because it's one that you can't argue against, if you're a moderate Democrat, a regular Democrat, you agree with this. And if you're a Democrat politician arguing against it, your constituencies are looking at you like you're an imbecile. Criminal illegal aliens. So let's make the distinction. First of all, if you come into the country illegally, you snuck in through the desert, you came in the trunk of a car, you came in a sealed shipping container, you do anything other than going to the various points of entry around the country where you can show up and make an application to legally come into the country. If you came into the country in any other way, that means you broke the law and are therefore a criminal. So when people on TV say these people are law-abiding neighbors, no, they're not law-abiding. They broke the law to get where they are. Okay? Now, having put that fact aside, then there are people who come in and here and break the rules. They drive drunk. They rob people. They assault people. They get involved in drug dealing. They break into homes, drunk and drive and kill somebody, possess drugs. I mean, they do all of these different laws that they break. And very often, many of these people have broken multiple laws, been deported, came back. These are the people they're looking for first. They have their names. They have their faces. Many of them, they know where they are generally. So these, quote, roundups, these raids that you hear about in the news, these are all people who are criminal illegal aliens, meaning they have broke more than one serious law other than just coming into the country without permission. So if you're a Democrat, you can't fight against this. You're going to look like an idiot. Nobody wants a criminal illegal that has been involved in gang activity wandering around their neighborhoods. Nobody wants an illegal wandering around their neighborhoods that's been arrested more than once for sexual assault. So everybody they're picking up now are criminals. Now, when they raid a establishment where they think somebody is working, they are going to ask about everybody else there. That is normal procedure for all law enforcement. In other words, put illegals aside. If you are working at a retail shop and that retail shop has been under surveillance for drug dealing out the back of the storefront, or if someone has given them a credible tip and they're going to raid that store and you happen to work there, but you don't know about the illegal activity, the cops don't know that you don't know about the illegal activity. So when they raid it, they're going to arrest the person that they're specifically looking for, and they're going to question everybody else. That is normal procedure across the country for the last 50 years, for all crimes. So when you hear news stories, if they sound like Trump is doing something extraordinary, something extra, he's not. Literally, the only difference between Trump's executive order and Biden was Biden decided that they weren't going to enforce these rules. In other words, look at something, a different subject for a second. The issue of marijuana. Weed, both its usage and the selling of it, is a federal crime, period. That has not changed. What has changed is various states have enacted their own laws stating that personal use is okay, and that you can sell weed, and they got the whole little, weed shops now for people who have the little white cards and all that. That's very well nice, but that's happening because people in federal government has just decided they're not going to enforce it. So this is the same thing with these executive orders. Trump is now enforcing the laws that are already on the books. There are no newer laws. He hasn't passed any newer laws. He's the president. He can't make new law. Only Congress can. But he can direct federal agencies to actually go forth and enforce the laws that are already on the books that people should have been following. And that's essentially all he's really doing as far as that's concerned. Now, let's talk about the next contentious issue here, right? Let me get a drink, a little dry here. The next thing I think about is Trump did write an executive order in which he is essentially directing the country that birthright citizenship is not a thing. That kids born going forward of illegal parents in the U.S. are not automatically citizens. Now, that's an executive order he signed. It's for show. Now, when I say it's for show, I'm not saying that because he doesn't mean it. He certainly means it. He certainly does. He does not believe in this idea that if you sneak across the desert and your kid is born literally on the border, that your kid is now an American citizen. He thinks that's ridiculous. We're one of the only countries left in the world that even have something like that. Most countries don't. And so he wants that changed. Now, can he change it? No. He can't. 14th Amendment is clear on this. Well, it's not clear, but ostensibly, the legal doctrine for the last 100 years has been that any kids, any person subject to, well, in fact, let me pull it up exactly here. Let's not have me just read it off to you real quick here. 14th Amendment, birthright citizenship. Let's just look at this. Okay. And look at the actual text. Let me just find the right one I want. No, we don't want to go to the White House because that's going to be his point of view. And that's not what we want to go and do. All right, let's take a look here. This is all right, so let's see where we go. Oh, come on. You would think that if you're going to write an article about something, that you actually have the text of it, right? Okay, here we go. Let me make sure. All right, so here we go. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. The contentious portion is this: subject to the jurisdiction thereof. What does that mean? If you listen to Supreme Court constitutional precedent, it means that if you're born here, whether or not your parents happen to be citizens or not, the child itself is an American citizen. And that's the way it's been for 100 years. Okay? So if it's so clear, what is it that Trump is trying to do? Well, here's the thing. There's been a contingent, for most part, a fringe contingent within legal concept circles throughout the years that have said that that line does not mean what people say it does. Because someone who is illegal is clearly not subject to the United States because they are not a subject of the United States. They're not a citizen. They owe their allegiance back home in China, Jamaica, Africa, Germany. Pick the country you want. And as a result, their kids would not be citizens. Now, that point of view has been roundly rejected, essentially, for decades. It's established that that's not the case. So this should be a pretty open and shut case when it gets to the Supreme Court. That a preliminary judge out in Seattle halted this executive order is no surprise to the Trump organization. They knew that this was going to happen. They knew that there were going to be fights and likely defeats on this within the appeals courts because this is going to be a Supreme Court play. So what happens when it gets to the Supreme Court, given that there's a strong conservative majority? Well, let's look at some further background. And Will Cain did an excellent job of explaining some things about this whole dynamic on his new show. I'm going to intercut video of that right now so you can hear the explanation, and we're going to talk about it on the other side. All right, so there you have it. It's very interesting, right? It's very interesting because on first blush, it's obvious that this is a fool's errand for President Trump. My prediction would be that it was going to be a 9-0 booting of this particular concept. But when you listen to what they're saying, the person who actually wrote those words saying that this does not include aliens in speeches and writings surrounding when the 14th Amendment was first written and ratified and everything is very interesting because it goes to original intent. And the thing about most of the, quote, conservative justices, while they are conservative, the primary reason they were chosen, especially the ones that Trump picked, was that they are originalists. And what originalist means is that you go back to what was the original intent of each and every part of the Constitution as written by the people at that time. Because originalists believe that what they said they meant, and that the Constitution is not a living document. It does not evolve with the times. It does not evolve with the mores of modern society. It's written in stone and the principles remain the same. And then you just have to figure out how the principle is applied to certain situations in the modern world. So you look at the original intent of the 14th Amendment. It was to make the children of slaves citizens. That's why it was created. It didn't have anything to do with Chinese workers or American Indians or anybody else coming into the country. This is to tell the whole states and future generations, the children of slaves are citizens of the United States, period. However, the precedent that was done when this was challenged goes in an opposite direction. And it says that the Chinese citizen, he was in fact a citizen because his family, his parents, had lived in the U.S. for so long that they were subject to the rules of the state that they lived in, subject to the rules of the federal government broadly, and that, as a result, made their child an American citizen. That's how they interpret it, and that's been the interpretation ever since. So there's wiggle room here, but not a lot of it. Because look at this from the opposite point of view. If an illegal comes into the country and they're not subject to the United States, quote unquote, then that means they can break our laws and we can't prosecute them. They're not subject to the laws of the United States, right? Now, of course, that's ridiculous to think that anybody can come into the country and break our laws and we don't have the wherewithal to prosecute them because they're not American citizens. It doesn't work that way. When you visit another country, you become subject to their rules and regulations as a visitor to that country. That's why if you go over to Dubai or some of these other Muslim countries and act in ways that are normal for America, you might find your ass arrested and detained because you can't act like you do there like you do here, especially when it comes to displays of physical affection out in the open and everything. The same thing. So in order for conservatives to really make the argument that illegal immigrants are not subject to, they also have to make the argument, whether they realize it or not, that that means that, I don't know why this thing keeps doing this, means that they cannot prosecute them for laws broken in the U.S., which is patently ridiculous. So if they are subject to those rules because they are in the country, then it naturally follows that as a result, their kids would also be citizens. Now, should their kids be citizens? No. Let's make this clear. Birthright citizenship in the way that we do it is a mistake. We have the most perfect document ever created for creating a nation of people, rights, and things of that nature, but the Constitution isn't perfect. And there are some things that are missing and some things that are less than clear looking at it through a modern lens. And as a result of that, we have these issues. So when it gets to the Supreme Court, there is some wiggle room here. If I had to bet money, I still say Trump loses this fight. I think it's going to be a 7-2 victory for the Democrats on this. I expect that maybe Alito and Thomas might be down for reinterpreting the words and the meaning of that portion of the 14th Amendment, because obviously they're not going to get rid of the whole 14th Amendment. So that's not going to happen. And then beyond that, I expect that the opinion, whoever writes it, but will probably be written by Justice Roberts, is going to say something along the lines of, if you want this changed, then you have to do a constitutional amendment. The Constitution allows and has set up a procedure for changing things in its document. If you can get the votes, you can do it. But no one can get the votes for that. You should be able to, but just like Democrats are never going to be able to get a constitutional amendment that gets rid of the right for guns or puts the right to an abortion as a federal right, that's never going to happen. This isn't going to happen. The numbers are not there for how you have to get 2/3 of the states and 60% of the legislature and all these things to agree to that constitutional amendment, it's never going to happen. And so ultimately, this is all going to be for show. I mean, make no mistake, Trump is shooting his shot. And there's an outsized possibility that you could get a 4-5 decision in favor of ending birthright citizenship the way we understand it and the way it's been practiced. Now, if they do that, it's important, and I'm going to end with this one last thing on this issue. Don't think it's unprecedented. Precedent can be overturned. And I'm not even talking about Roe versus Wade, although that's the most recent example that people would like to point to. You know, Brown versus Board of Education. That's a celebrated, legal decision. But people don't understand that decision was ignoring precedent before it. The precedent for that was in the opposite direction. And the Supreme Court in Brown decided that they were going to go in the opposite direction and ignore the precedent and set a new one. So it has happened, it can happen, and, if it does, I'm sure there'll be a lot of meltdowns, but, at least there's a kernel of justification for it. The hardest thing that anybody soliciting to the Supreme Court on this issue is going to have is, look, this is the way it's been for 100 years, and the precedent for it, the court case that set that precedent, the judges were obviously much closer to when the 14th Amendment was written and when those words were marked down than we are. So they knew the intent and they went another direction. It'd be hard to say they didn't have a good reason, but we shall see. All right, so let's take a look at what we got next going on here. We've talked about the executive orders. We've gone over Pete. Yes, let's talk about one other executive order, one other thing, because it leads into a much larger discussion that needs to be had here. And that's this. Trump pardoned all of January 6ers. All of them. 1,600 people, and 6 people he commuted their sentences. There's like 16 others that they're looking into. At first, there was some talking about, well, we're going to take a look at all of them. We're not going to necessarily pardon people who really did attack police physically and all this. And that all went out the window. He pardoned everybody. Now, I'm on the record as saying that, that was one of the first things I was looking to see from him. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, yes, they should have been pardoned. All right. There's only one cop that got hurt, and he didn't get hurt at the actual event. He died, unfortunately, later because of health issues that had nothing to do with January 6th. There were physical confrontations with some of the police, mostly pushing and shoving. I don't see any video of police actually getting attacked with weapons or anything like that. None of the January 6 people had any firearms. There were never any, bombs found. There was a lot of speculation when it was going on that there were explosives nearby and all this stuff. None of that was true. So they all should have been given, commuted their systems, or given pardons rather. And I'm glad that they were. But a lot of people within the Republican community feel like, no, you guys talk about law and order, but you went ahead and look what you did. And, that's a valid point to a certain degree. I don't care. Just to be clear, I don't care. They can just be upset about it. But there's something to that. So let's talk about one other thing here. I want to make sure. Let's see. No, that's not that. No, we're not going to talk about that yet. Yes. So, on Facebook, I was accused a couple of weeks ago of being a never Trumper. Yeah, kind of surprising. I voted for the man 3 separate times, but somehow I'm a never Trumper. And Trump has been going around saying a lot of different things that are kind of silly and ridiculous. I've, detailed some of them in some of my previous articles at the Media Outlaw Substack newsletter. The Gulf of America. Dumb. We're going to take over Panama Canal. No, we're really not. We're going to get Greenland, and if they don't want to come to us, we'll either force them perhaps militarily or economically. No, not going to happen. Trump is saying these things, and a lot of his MAGA supporters are on board with it. They've jumped on the bandwagon. And that's kind of stupid. People with a little bit more sense are pointing this out. So let's be a little bit more specific about this issue here, okay? One does not simply agree with Donald Trump just because he said something. Just because he has a good idea, or any idea, doesn't make it a good one. Just because he says something should be done doesn't mean we can or should even try. Okay? So Greenland, for example. If Greenland wants us to buy them, we can make a deal. If Greenland doesn't want us to buy them, as they've said, then guess what? We don't get to buy them, and we don't get to force them into allowing us to buy them. Period. Let's be clear. The days of imperialism are over. That's done. We're not doing that crap anymore. And if someone's going to, the last person to do it should be Trump, considering that's all his opponents ever talk about. Him being a dictator, being a fascist, being all these things that we know he's not, but you're giving fuel to their accusations when you say silly stuff like that. Panama Canal. People are on social media stating that we can take the canal back because they haven't lived up to their side of the treaty. That's just cope. It's a complete lie. It's inaccurate. The treaty was simple. They get to have the canal and control of it as long as the canal remains neutral, meaning any country that has goods to ship that is willing and able to pay the interest and exit fees to get in and through the canal should be allowed to go through it, regardless of what's going on within the world. So, for example, with Russia and Ukraine, we've got all kinds of sanctions against them. But guess what? If Russia wants to ship something through the canal, they can do it because that has to remain neutral. And it has. Now, does China use it? Well, of course China does. They make everything for everybody. Okay? When you look at where things are made, sure, there's Indonesia, there's South Korea, there are a few other places, but the majority of the crap we order off of Amazon is made in China. It has to get to us somehow. One of the ways it does is going through the canal. So that does give China some leverage to ask and demand certain things from Panama. Panama is under no obligation to capitulate, just like they're under no obligation to capitulate to us. Stating these simple facts does not make anybody a Trump hater, a rhino, a never Trumper. Agreeing with and saying yes to each and every single thing that Trump says makes you unreasonable. That's not smart. Don't do that. At the end of the day, Trump is still a human being, which means he's going to make mistakes. Every president makes mistakes. Everyone. He will too. Guaranteed. Some of them are easily predictable. So don't fall into the trap, whether it's this idea of Greenland, Panama, or some of his new departments. So let's talk about what's going on with the first department that he decided he wanted to get. DOGE. The Department of Governmental Efficiency. All right. So this week, Vivek announced that he's going to be stepping away from the one initiative that he and Elon were supposed to be working together. Vivek made part of his own presidential campaign, a large part of it, talking about how you reduce the size of government and the best ways to do so quickly and why it's imperative that we do. So that he was going to be involved with this was a smart idea. But now he's not. There's a whole lot of speculation about why he isn't. He's going to run for the governorship of Ohio. I'm not a big fan of that idea. You just ran for president, and now you're running for a different office altogether. It looks like you're chasing political offices to me when people do this. You know, Carrie Lake has done this. She ran for senator, and then she ran for Congress, and she ran for a governorship. It's like, stop. Pick something. Win, lose, take some time, and then run again later on. What he should have done was given up the option to run for Ohio governor and worked on Doge. All right. To me, that sounds like doing it the opposite way. He's more concerned with his own political future than many of the things that he said. Now, on the opposite end, there's a lot of rumors that Vivek was getting on everybody's nerves. I've seen a lot of different commentary that his personality is, they found grating, whether it's Trump, Elon, Trump's family, other high-level cabinet members. He was wearing his welcome out, so to speak, is the scuttlebutt. And I can believe that to a certain degree because, Vivek is like Elon. They're both brilliant. They're both in the tech sector. But whereas Elon can be seen as somewhat eccentric because people think he's on the spectrum or something, Vivek isn't. Vivek just is a high energy, very smart, too smart for his own good type of person. And so he says things that are blunt that rattles people's feathers. So one of them, for example, a few weeks ago was the H-1B visa situation. And he made the argument that, look, Americans need to get their kids away from Nikes and into studying, off of video games, and basically, from his critics, shamed Americans into what they weren't doing. And I found this a little bit curious because isn't one of conservatives' primary complaints about education in the country that kids out here can't read at the level they're supposed to? Where are our math levels compared to the rest of the world? Where are our reading levels? Isn't the state of California and Oregon both lowering reading and math standards just so they can get kids to graduate from high school? It seems to me that what Vivek said was an ugly truth. You might not like to hear it, just like after eating onions and garlic, you don't want to hear that your breath smells, but it does. And so what Vivek said is true. Right now, we're beating the rest of the world based on two things: the structure of our government, and that structure allows innovation. So it allows the smallest number of people who are smart, can read, are high level, to innovate in ways that allow us to dominate the marketplace and the cultural landscape of the world. But that doesn't mean that other countries can't catch up. Eventually, they can. No one stays the king forever. And given that our education system is getting worse and worse in terms of outcomes, we need to be thinking about this. Now, that's a whole other subject by itself that I could get into for a whole 2 hours. I'm not going to get too off onto a tangent. The main thing is Doge, Vivek's not going to be a part of that anymore because people, either he wants to be the governor, he wants to be he wants to be part of the political class as opposed to working in government to fix the problem, leaving Elon in charge of this. Now, here's a concept. Don't think about government for a moment here. What we're going to talk about is an idea about concepts, all right? If your family is in debt, car loans, mortgage that you can't pay, second mortgage or a home equity loan, and lots of credit cards. The way that you solve that debt problem is not by adding 2 new credit accounts. You don't go out and get 2 new credit cards while you're keeping all the others. You don't go out and spend more money. Okay? You don't do that. The whole idea is to reduce your debt. So you get rid of credit cards. You get rid of credit lines. You get rid of loans. You don't increase them. To wit, if you're coming in saying, we're going to make government more efficient, we're going to reduce the size of government, then that means you don't create 2 new departments. So we're going to have Doge, and we're going to have the external revenue service. All right, so let me see here. Why does this keep going over here? Sorry, my screen is doing a little something weird here with, I don't want it to do. Okay, fine, that's better. So, the External Revenue Service. Extensively, this is going to be a new department tasked with collecting tariffs and also past due loans that other countries owe us. So, like, if we give somebody foreign aid, very often that foreign aid will take the form of either weapons, like with Ukraine and like with Israel. Very seldom is it actual money, but we do have that type of foreign aid too. Investments, we'll call them investments into like Africa or something. Whatever the case may be, we'll give these loans. And so these countries owe us money. Now, very often we're very lenient about how that gets repaid or if it even gets repaid, but it's there. So ostensibly, the External Revenue Service would be a new department tasked with collecting that revenue. And then I guess, I don't know what they're going to do in terms of distributing it, but that's what they would be doing. So it's a brand new one. We'd have the Internal Revenue Service and the External Revenue Service. And we'd have, as of right now, Doge. So 2 new departments with new office space, new employees that over time will become a larger contingent of employees. No. And I'm sick and tired of MAGA Nation people signing on for this. This is a concept. If you have 220 departments, you want your departments to get reduced to 180. You don't want it to go up to 122 departments. Creating new departments is not the way to make government smaller. Beyond that, a fight that we're going to have in a few weeks here, saying that we shouldn't have a debt limit, which is what Trump is saying, that is not smart. That is ridiculous. It's silly. And if you're a MAGA voter who is okay with it, you're being silly. We are supposed to be the place of smaller government. That's what Republicans are supposed to be. And that's certainly what conservatives are supposed to be. You can say, oh, there's conservatives and then there's rhinos, mainstream, established people, and they have no problem spending money. Well, if you think you're part of the non-establishment because you walk around with a MAGA hat on and voted for Donald Trump, and yet you're saying, let's get rid of the debt limit, no debt ceiling, then that's establishment thinking. That's normalized debt. And if we do that, we're as much the problem as Democrats. You can't, with any moral authority at all, talk about too much spending if you come in and get rid of the debt ceiling and they do a bunch of spending. I mean, I don't even understand why this is even a conversation piece. The same people who were ticked off at the House, Johnson now, and Kevin O'Connell before, and many of the other speakers before, saying that they're not doing their job of holding the government accountable on spending because we controlled the purse strings. These are the same people that are on board now for having no debt ceiling? Seriously? That's what's happened in the last 3 months? It's utter nonsense. Just stop. It's utter nonsense. Okay? Just because Trump says it doesn't make it a good idea. He's going to have the following types of ideas. Good ones, middle of the road ones, and terrible ones. He's going to have ideas that work, that don't do much of anything, and that fail. And that's going to happen because it happens to every single president without exception. And he will not be the one either. When you allow or support things that you should be not supporting, you allow the bad idea components to increase. So you guys got to get off of that. All right, you got to get off this idea that A, you can't criticize him, B, that there isn't any room for legitimate criticism of what he does, and C, that if you do it, whoever does it, because I'm going to be doing it a lot, I'm going to be calling balls and strikes this entire 4 years. When he does something great, I'm going to laugh and say it. When he trolls somebody in a way that's hilarious, I'm going to laugh and say it. But when he does something or says something that shouldn't be said, shouldn't be done, I'm going to say it, and you should too. Speaking of things that should not be said, I'm going to end today's video with, I don't even know who this guy's name is. Let's look it up real quick here. It's kind of ridiculous, but let's look it up. Just do keyword search, third term. All right, so, yes, this guy. Let me pull this up. Oh, he's so proud. So proud of himself. Such an imbecile. All right, let's look at this. So this is Congressman Andy Ogles, Tennessee, 5th District. And he just put forth an amendment to allow Trump to serve a 3rd term, ignoring or undoing the idea that a president can serve only 2 terms in the office. So this is what this guy looks like. This is who we're dealing with right now. And let's see. Proposes amending the 22nd Amendment to allow Trump to serve a 3rd term. So Trump is 79 years old. After 4 years, he'll be 84. Why would we want him to serve from 84 to 88? Doesn't that sound kind of stupid? Of course it sounds stupid. So we're not going to give him much more oxygen other than to say, this is dumb. In American Backbone, I talk about type of people that leaders have to look out for. Yes men. People that gaslight you, blow you up, kiss your ass, basically do things to integrate themselves with you in a way that's not authentic. And they're dangerous not only because they essentially greenlight everything you say. I mean, everything you say becomes the most brilliant thing ever uttered upon the earth. They also will whisper in your ear and tell you, hey, don't listen to that person over there. They're really against you. You know, Stephen Miller is that type of person, and he's in the administration, and it's one of the potential problem points that we're going to have over the next couple of years. But this gentleman right here seems to be doing the same thing. Wants to get in good with the MAGA crowd, wants to stick his chest out, so to speak, and prove his bona fides of, I'm really down for the president. But doing it this way just makes you look like a stupid suck up. It's just, it's dumb. The 5th District of Tennessee, sorry, you need to find somebody with a little bit more discernment to represent you. This guy's not it. Okay? If I was to speak to this guy, I'd be like, Andy, stop it, man. What are you doing? What are you doing? Number one, you're never going to get that type of amendment through, so why even talk about it? There's no upside to that. Okay? 3, don't try and kiss Trump's ass in order to get in good with him. Just support what he's doing in your state and with your votes, and you'll come to his attention naturally. But you go out and do this crazy stuff, it's not going to go well for you, bro. Don't do that again. All right? Just stop. I'm trying to help you out here. That was dumb, and it makes you look weak. It makes you think like you really don't care about norms. Trump is going to serve, and then God willing, J.D. Vance will. A lot is up in the air for that. We don't know what's going to happen over the next 4 years. I guarantee you 2 or 3 things that we don't have on the horizon are going to happen, because that always is the case with any presidential term. There's always something that they end up having to deal with that was not on the agenda. And it can alter things dramatically. COVID was one thing. The mortgage crisis was another. So, 9/11, these things always happen. If we handle that unknown event and the things that we're working on now well and do our job, then we'll keep the White House in 4 years. And Trump will be seen as a historic president that will be a hero to some, a villain to others, of course, but his impact won't be disputed by anybody. But if you try to go about it this way, you're just going to cause problems for yourself, for the party. Don't do that. All right, so I'm going to end our discussion today with that little ridiculousness. Like and subscribe to the video if you see this on YouTube. If you're getting this on the newsletter itself, do the same thing. Subscribe below. Please make any comments. Ask any questions you might have. And remember, we post at least once a week Although, with everything that's been going on with Trump, we're probably going to have to post a heck of a lot more often. Have a good weekend.